succéder à Eric Anceau et qui est Giuseppe Mecca de l'Université de Passau de venir à la tribune pour nous parler du rôle du Parlement dans la confection du budget en Italie sous le statut albertain, si je traduis presque correctement votre titre. Nous vous écoutons. Merci beaucoup d'être là.
It is a great honor to attend this conference that is a fixed and important appointment which takes place every year. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Jean-Garric for having accepting my intervention at the organizing committee that has permitted me to discuss my research on the origins of representative government in Italy. This research has matured into an international research project reconsidering constitutional formation that has received funds from the European Research Council under the coordination of the University of Passau. On this occasion, I will only present some of my suggestions with respect to the broader theme by focusing on the role of Parliament in financial matters under the first phase of the Statute Albertino. Preliminary remarks on the representative government in Italy. If the parliamentary system is the institutional mechanism that links the cabinet to the electoral chamber through so-called confidence and the principle that parliament is capable of guiding government policies, this has had difficulties in establishing itself. Likewise, parliamentary control is by no means laid down by the Constitution, but is in great respects left to the practice. Rather, the normative text of the Albertine age described the form of government with the expression representative government. The formula is not an invention of Italian constituents, but it can be found, for example, in the Projet d'acte constitutionnel of 29 of June 1815 and was circulated through the reflection of French jurists. For instance, according to the famous classification by François Guizot, the government can be constitutional or absolute, representative or non-representative. In his book, Histoire des origines du gouvernement représentatif, he pointed out that the classification of government forms often focusing on material elements, but to really appreciate the form of government, one had to look at the constitutive principles. In fact, Guizot felt that it was not possible to find a representative government just because there were elections or an elected assembly. To characterize this form was the principle of the Université du Droit, according to which the government was entrusted to the most capable. In Italy, in the Italian experience, the representative government is a flexible category in movement between the limited monarchy, where the monarch is the head of executive power, and the parliamentary form. In general, it could be said that representative government is a kind of constitutional government that is based on the idea that the exercise of political power faces limits because the sovereignty cannot be focused in one body. Secondly, it is based on the consent of public opinion. Lastly, the consequence of representative principle is the rule of responsibility of the rulers towards the voters. The meaning or meanings or Article 10. The Albertine Statute was promulgated on 4 of March 1848. The Italian Constitution was characterized by archaic and ambiguous language as well as by an inorganic text. In financial matters, Article 10 stated that, I quote, any law on the imposition of fees and the approval of budget is first presented to the Chamber of Deputies, unquote. This rule was supplemented by Article 30 saying that, I quote, no tax may be imposed unless it is permitted by the Chamber of Deputies and sanctioned by the King, unquote. There are no discussions regarding this norm in the minutes of the Consiglio di Conferenza. Ministers stated that only after the promulgation of the Constitution, the Crown would no longer have the right to set taxes. In particular, Article 10 posed a sum of problems of interpretation. The first of these problems concerned the exact meaning of the budget law. With this expression, parliamentary practice encompasses any law which has a direct and specific purpose of increasing the cost of the states, but not those which have indirect expenses. The second problem of the interpretation was if the Statute Albertino intended to accept the English principle that reserved a legislative initiative in the budget matters only to the cabinet with the exclusion of the parliament. In that regard, the letter of the statute merely stated that the budget law had to be presented first to the Chamber of Deputies, with the understanding that the act of presentation was an initiative of the cabinet. The third problem of interpretation concerned the power of Senate with the possibility of amending a financial law that had already been approved by the deputies. The expression in Article 10, I quote, the budget was first presented to the Chamber of Deputies, unquote, created dispute among the interpreters. In fact, in 1851, Cavour, Minister of Finance, argued that the Senate's power to amend the financial laws was constitutional if the modification did not alter the principle of the law itself and did not give it a different character. In short, according to Cavour, the principles contained in the financial law were the limits given to the competencies of Senate. The solution by Cavour found numerous opponents who, fascinated by the English experience, attributed the veto to the Senate and not the possibility of amending financial laws. Among them was Melegari, who introduced the topic in one of his university lectures. During the first De Petris cabinet, the conflict between the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate reappeared over the abolition of the tax on wheat milled. According to the Prime Minister, Article 10 limited the power of Senate to propose amendments, while other speakers supported the Senate's competence to amend the tax law. The government of De Petris posed a question of confidence and was clamorously defeated. The interpreters who limited the Senate's financial competencies based their own reasons on the nature of this branch of Parliament. In fact, this chamber was not elected. According to Luigi Palma, parliamentary practice had instead conferred on the Senate a regularity power to oblige the Chamber of Deputies to reconsider its plans to evaluate Senate's objections. This is because in Italy, the Senate is not a chamber of aristocracy, but it is an assembly of noteworthy men, almost always elected in virtue of the fact that the senators were chosen by the king on the proposal of the prime minister. So the conflict was solved in a more practical way. Sometimes the Chamber of Deputies accepts some Senate amendments. Most often, the Senate renounces the changes of the original text by the Chamber of Deputies after a second approval. The budget process in front of the modern constitutionalism. The parliamentary function to check and approve taxation had ancient origins. In the medieval age, parliaments had the power to control the fees in order to preserve the privileges acquired by the lords and municipalities. Nevertheless, it is important to underline that during the ancient regime, the financial administration came under royal prerogatives, and the king did not have the obligation to make transparent the cons and the state accounts. Whereas, with the promulgation of the Constitution, public spending was no longer considered a matter for the king, but a contribution for a public use. According to Giuseppe Maranini, the principle of Article 10 has its origins in English public law. Indeed, in England, there was a set of rules for which the financial initiative was the executive power, and the financial laws were approved by the House of Commons, which could amend, diminish, or abolish taxes. The House of Lords could approve or reject it without any amendments. The liberal Italian movement studied, appreciated, and idealized English constitutionalism, but Article 10 of the Statute Albertino was modulated on Article 15 of the Charte Constitutionnelle of 1830. It is clear from the minutes of the Consiglio di Conferenza that the French constitutionalism of the Restoration was imitated by the compilers of the Statute. This can be explained not only by the similarity between provision contained in the Statuto Albertino and the Constitution of 1814 and 1830, but also for a cultural proximity between the Kingdom of Sardinia and France. Specifically, the period of French Restoration was an important laboratory for the elaboration of the modern principles of the budgetary law. From 1814, public debates was animated by a need for transparency and an interest in public finance. This was translated into legislation regarding public money. Italian Parliament and the finances of the states. Also, in Italy, finance has played a central role in the history of the state. Parliamentary debate on the budget was the occasion to implement some of the norms in this area and to establish how Parliament exercised its power of control. At first, except for a few examples, the Chamber of Deputies discussed and voted the Bill of Budget in separate documents like the central administration. It was distinguished between ministries and agencies. In the Senate, on the contrary, the custom was to make one report for all these budgets. The discussion took place regarding expenditure item, capitoli di spesa, except for serious issues of form. This practice did not give clarity and simplicity to the discussion. One major intervention in the matters of public spending was by the Minister of Finance, Camillo Cavour, with the law of 22nd of March 1853, number 1483. By law, the law by Cavour, based on the French budget law of 1838 and the Belgian law of 1846, approved the reporting obligation by the state administration. Subsequently, the law of the 2nd of November 1859, supplemented by the implementing regulation of 7 November 1816, contained the first discipline of the annual budgets. These rules were amended by the Minister Luigi Guglielmo Campredigny, law of 22nd of April 1869. It was the first organic legislation on the state account. This law provided for the creation of a state accounting office separate from the General Treasury and a State General Accounting Department, Ragioneria Generale dello Stato, for a regular keeping of the financial writings. The State General Accounting Department, la Ragioneria di Stato, had to ensure an orderly, correct, uniform presentation of financial data and was immediately dependent on the Minister of Finance. The legislation arranged the rules of double entry method. It definitely established the annuity principle of the discussion, which was established by the custom, and the rule of a unified and non-separate scrutiny of the budget. However, the law left unresolved the problem of achieving effective control and vigilance. In this regard, Giorgio Arcoleo noted that financial control had not been exercised with great success. Parliamentary role was reduced to mere political control and was not governed by a clear legal principle. In other words, the legislative control had been reduced to a formal act of the regularity of public spending. In return, it was necessary to wait for the following years and to present the new budget bill to verify proper financial management. Indeed, the professor considered that the budget was not a mere mathematical mechanism consist of numbers and expenses, but had a legal part in which the political will of the cabinet was absent. In this regard, the Italian jurists suggested that Parliament was supported by a panel of experts from the Court of Auditors. In this way, parliamentary control would be more incisive. Conclusion. The discussion on the budget always assumed a political nature. In other words, the budget process implied a vote of confidence. The parliamentary practice affirmed the initiative of cabinet in this area of the budget processes and the priority of the Chamber of Deputies under the Senate in these discussions. The Statute Albertino also adopted the principle of the annuity of the budget vote. On the other hand, the executive power denied the right to adopt financial measures without the prior vote of Parliament. It was established that the variation of taxes and expenses must derive from special laws. The role of Parliament was left to the spontaneity of institutional life. Constitutional interpretation and the practice constituted one of the main mechanisms for developing the financial scrutiny by Parliament. Thank you for your kind attention.